Hear now the reading of a shocking and astonishing parable told by Jesus. You can read it yourself in Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14, and it goes. Jesus responded by speaking again in parables. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding party for his son. He sent his servants to call those invited to the wedding party, but they didn't want to come. Again, he sent other servants and said to them, "Tell those who have been invited, look, the meal is all prepared. I've butchered the oxen and the fattened calf. Now everything's ready. Come to the wedding party." But they paid no attention and went away, some to their fields, others to their businesses. The rest of them grabbed his servants, abused them, and killed them. The king was angry. He sent his soldiers to destroy those murderers and set their city on fire. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding party is prepared, but those who were invited weren't worthy. Therefore, go to the roads on the edge of town and invite everyone you find to the wedding party." Then those servants went to the roads and gathered everyone they found, both evil and good. The wedding party was full of guests. Now, when the king came in and saw the guests, he spotted a man who wasn't wearing wedding clothes. He said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" But he was speechless. Then the king said to his servants, "Tie his hands and feet and throw him out into the farthest darkness. People there will be weeping and grinding their teeth. Many are invited, but few people are chosen." So this is another parable about the realm of God. And I think about all of these parables probably are about the realm of God and trying to help us see the difference between the realm of God, the place where all is as it should be, and where we now reside, the time and history, the place, the communities in which we find ourselves. And Jesus would speak about this place as if it were just on the horizon, but also he would speak of it as if it were breaking in real time, as if it were all around us in tangible ways. For instance, there was a time when Jesus fed thousands of people and everyone had all they needed. And in that moment, you catch a glimpse of things as they should be. There were many other times where Jesus restored the minds and the bodies of those who were not well in mind and body. Then there were still other times where Jesus showed compassion to those who were on the fringes or outside of those deemed acceptable, those outcasts to their communities, so that going forward, they would not be alone anymore, ostracized no more. So I'm trying to paint a picture here of what Jesus talked about, or what Jesus was trying to describe when he talked about the realm of God, or the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven. And there are other places in the Gospels where Jesus makes it far more clear than anyone possibly could. His Sermon on the Mount is perhaps the most well-known example of this, and I just like to read a few snippets from it, some of the most memorable lines, specifically the Beatitudes. And you can read these for yourself in Matthew chapter 5. And there we read, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who are sad, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And what's striking about these statements is that they seem to describe a world turned upside down. You tell me where the meek inherit the earth. Not on this earth, not on this planet, not where I live. Show me the place where peacemakers are treated with deference, perhaps like celebrities or those endowed with significance and importance. You tell me where this place is. It's like the Lord's Prayer come alive. A prayer which includes request for enough food, freedom from evil, and forgiveness for all. As I said, it's the Lord's Prayer, come alive, which we really should always have expected because every week we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, we ask every week when we pray this prayer for God's realm to come alive here and now, as it is in heaven, on earth. We strive for such a world in the here and now, and we try to cultivate it in pockets. And some have been so bold as to call what we're doing in those pockets church, and then other times church looks nothing like the realm of God. We are flawed humans, trying our best and sometimes not trying our best. So we try to invite others, we hope. The dream is to try to invite others to this radical way of life. But alas, not everyone comes to the party. This parable today that I just read for you a moment ago is about those who do not want to come to the party. To go back to the parable. The king is throwing a wedding party for his son. The wedding feast is a metaphor for the realm of God, as we've been describing it. The place where all is right with the world, where it is joyous, a joyous space, and everybody has enough. And the table where the feast is set is meant to represent the world as God intends it to be, the place where we all sit down, reconciled to one another, and enjoying life in this life-giving community. This is what the king is inviting the people to. So where is the rub? We'll find out as we go forward. It was the custom in those days to send out 2 invitations, and we read this custom in this parable. You see it at play, where the king sends out the servants the first time for the first invitation. The first invitation was sort of a feeler as to who might be willing to go. Others would wait and see who was going. Were the right sort of people going? No? Well, then maybe I'll just leave it alone. And the first invitees, it would turn out, didn't respond favorably at all to the first invitation, which is odd because it's the king inviting you, for Pete's sake, and you'd think that you would jump at the invitation, but they don't. So the king sends out the second invitation along with a description of the meal. Perhaps if you describe how wonderful, how tasty, how pleasant this experience is going to be, then maybe the people will come up. And as I keep saying, this is a metaphor for the realm of God or the realm of heaven. And the second invitation is met with either indifference or worse, outright violence against the messengers. It says that those who didn't return to their businesses or to their work or the daily grind abused and even killed the messengers. So here is where we should expose still another layer of the metaphor. The servants who keep going out and spreading the word about the feast are meant to represent those who have gone before Jesus and also told people about the ways of God. We are to call to mind prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Elisha, Hosea, John the Baptist even. And these are those who decried the death-dealing ways of humanity and tried to point the people into a different direction, or to describe the realm of God and to invite people in. They implored people to treat outcasts well, the immigrant, the foreigner, the stranger. Remember, said Moses, remember when you were a slave in Egypt, when you encounter someone from the outside. And consider how you wish you had been treated when you were a slave in Egypt, and then treat the outsider likewise. That's the sort of thing that the prophets of old would said. They said that for people to live well, they need to beat their weapons of war into instruments of life. Swords into plowshares, used for sowing fields and creating food instead of drawing blood. And you can read that for yourself in Isaiah 2, verses 3 through 4. The prophet Micah told them to seek justice and mercy and to walk humbly before God, Micah 6:8. And these are the sorts of things that the messengers of God said way back when. And like the servants in today's parable, the message was not received well. They were met with either indifference or outright hostility, as prophets, I think, nearly always are. And it's always been this way. A message of life calling us to restoration and justice, and it falls on the ears of the people, and it falls on the ears of deaf people. But those who have long benefited by this status quo are always wanting none of it. Those in today's parable that reject the message and beat the servants and kill the servants, the prophet, the prophetic voice, represent those in history who have silenced the prophets or martyred the saints. They behead John the Baptist, assassinate Oscar Romero or Martin Luther King Jr., or perhaps they are too troubled by the disruptive message, so they continue to do what they do: clock in, clock out, so long as it keeps the lights on. Show up to work, watch their favorite shows, engage in the mindless digital hum of our lives these days. So, what is a king to do? What is the one who sends the prophets to do? The text reads that the king sent soldiers in to destroy the city. This is likely, almost certainly, a reference to what the Romans, in fact, already had done to Jerusalem. They had sacked the city and destroyed many holy places, and the Israelites no doubt viewed this as some form of divine retribution for their failure to live well, as they usually did. And while I personally find this theological logic troubling, I can attest that death-dealing ways do bring destruction. When there is no justice, there is, in fact, no peace. Violent cultures, greedy cultures, they don't need a god to pull the sky down. They don't need plagues to learn a lesson. They always pull the whole thing down on themselves. Rome and all empires collapse on their own habits. So the intuition of this parable rings true. Cities built on violence and greed, on exploitative practices, eventually do crumble. They eat themselves up from within. If only humanity could respond favorably to the cries of God's prophets, then things might go differently. But alas, here we are. So what does God do next? God then opens up the invitation to all, not just to those in power who benefit by the status quo, which would have been who a king would send the invitations to usually. It was very generous for God to provide an opportunity for them to turn from their ways, those who have most benefited by a system of exploitation and greed and violence, to turn from their ways. But their refusal was perhaps predictable. So what of those who live life on the edge? That's where the servants go to next. So in those days, the nobility and the well-to-do would live in the inner city. That is where they would reside, as close to the heart of the city as possible. And those who lived on the outskirts were those who were less well-to-do and those who were the least likely to be benefiting from a system of exploitation. And so on the outskirts, you'd find the less desirables. And so the text reads, they go to the roads on the edge of town, deliberately seeking these people out. These are not the sort of people that you would invite to your wedding, but they are the ones Jesus seems most interested in interacting with when we consider other stories about Jesus. And of course, they would respond favorably. They have never received an invitation like this in their lives. They have never had the luxury of buying into the illusion that the ways of Rome and the religious elite of their day had anything to offer them. And so, of course, they would show up. Rome taxed them and worked them beyond endurance. Their religious leaders worked with Rome to profit themselves and to give this theological gloss and defense to what was, in fact, indefensible. Sounds a bit like modern times, right? So the undesirables show up, and they can hardly believe that they are invited to sit at the table with the king and his son, the guest of honor. And yet they are. The text reads both evil and good. So it has nothing to do with their inherent moral fiber or their worth or anything. They are just declared worthy to be there by the king, because this is grace. Saints and sinners alike, now reconciled and eating from the same table. People like you and me, for after all, aren't we all admixtures of both good and sometimes evil, to use a harsh word. So they come in all humility. For who are they? Kidding. They don't belong there. But apparently they do. Such is the grace of God. But the parable then takes another twist. There is one guest who is wearing the wrong clothes. And I don't know if you've ever found yourself either overdressed or underdressed at an event or in some place. And it is quite uncomfortable. You stick out like a sore thumb. And when it happens to me, I'm painfully insecure and just want to get out of there. I don't like sticking out in that unflattering way. It shows that you don't quite know the rules of engagement or how to be in that space. And so on the first reading, you might be inclined to feel bad for this hapless soul. I mean, he didn't know he was about to be invited to a wedding. What, was he supposed to walk around in a suit and tie everywhere he went just in case? So again, we must uncover another layer to the metaphors in this parable. In those days, how you dressed indicated to others who you are. It's similar today, I think. The sort of person you are, your values and your commitments and your place in that society. And the clothes at this feast represent acts of kindness, love, grace, and charity. The kind of attributes that someone who fits well in the realm of God as described by Jesus. And so that's what the clothes represent here, and that is the metaphor. So to use another metaphor, by your fruits you shall know them. And in this case, at the wedding feast, how you are dressed. Think of the clothes at this feast as evidence that you value what the table God prepares for you represents. To be clothed wrongly at this place is to show yourself to be someone who does not have in mind the things of God and is unwilling to change their ways. So I try to think of modern examples that might fit this old metaphor. It would be like a greedy person showing up to a food pantry in a $5,000 suit, or a soup kitchen or homeless shelter in a $5,000 suit. It would be like an armed militant showing up at a peace rally. Clearly, they do not have the same values as those who are there. It would be like a Klansman in full Klan robes showing up at a banquet celebrating racial reconciliation. So you get the idea? Wrong clothes. They don't fit in, not because they weren't invited, but because they are not willing to throw off their old ways and adopt the life-giving ways of God, the ways that are alive and active in the realm of God. To work within the metaphor, here is someone who does not value what goes on at this party. This is a person who wants the cake at the party, but does not want to reject the greed, the violence, the narcissism, the prejudices, or what have you of his time. So it's no wonder that this person didn't fit in, trying to experience all of the benefits of the realm of God without any of the change of heart and ways of being that are required for those to live well there. It's like a fish out of water, truly, like a fish out of water. So he is bound and dragged from the party to a place where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is stock Gospel of Matthew language, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Those that reject life-giving ways always end up there. Some prefer to envision this as some form of retributive punishment. Again, this theological thread makes me more than uncomfortable. So I like to think of the anguish here described as the inevitable results of greed, violence, hatred, prejudice, fear of the other, and the exploitative practices of ages past and present. This sort of suffering is the result of those practices. The words from the 7th Psalm describe it well, verses 14, 15, and 16. See how they conceive evil, and are pregnant with mischief, and bring forth lies. They make a pit, digging it out, and fall into the hole that they have made. Their mischief returns upon their own heads, and on their own heads their violence descends. And you see it all the time. Ebenezer Scrooge embodied in his unreformed self forever and for all eternity. That would be hell. Or Gordon Gekko, or Adolf Hitler, or Roy Cohn. You take your pick. According to Jesus, the ways of death catch up to us in the end. But the ways of death are so alluring. The ways of empire captivate us all periodically, or for many, all of the time, which makes Jesus' commentary on this parable all the more tragic. Many are invited, but few are chosen. So I don't want to lapse into yet another theological quagmire about free will versus fatalism here. And if we did, we'd miss the point. The point is, look around you. Today, as in every other age, people reject the call towards God's realm and life-giving ways and bow down to the idols of their day. The idol might be the almighty dollar, wealth, greed, and the like. The idol might be a nation or the flag that represents that nation. The idol might be any number of things. You will know your idol when you identify what motivates you the most, what you pine for, what moves you to action, to tears, to anger in its defense at all costs. That is your God. And perhaps your idol, if it is not the God who is God. God calls our attention away from these idols into the realm, to the place where all is as it should be. God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He's calling us to this place on earth as best as we are able, away from the greed and towards generosity, away from prejudice and towards reconciliation, from injustice to justice, from lies to the truth, from violence to peace. The prophets, regrettably, are still ignored. And all too few show up eventually to the party, to the wedding feast. But here is an invitation for you to join the movement that Jesus calls us towards. Here's an invitation for you to reject the death-dealing ways of our greedy consumer culture, our violence fetishizing culture, our earth-destroying culture, and to accept the ways of Jesus. You and all your friends are invited to this party. Reject the old ways and put on the right clothes. In other words, live well and enter into the peace of God. There really is no other life worth living. Welcome to the feast God has prepared for us. Welcome, if you are able to come, in the right clothes, living the right way, to the party.